And I'm recording now as well. So great. Welcome everyone to our webinar today, Employee Ambassadorship, Linking Employee and Customer Experience. And today we're joined by Dr. Michael Lowenstein, at Beyond Philosophy. He's a thought leadership principal. And Beyond Philosophy is a leading customer experience consultancy and training company that has been around since 2003. And the topic of employee ambassadorship is something that Michael is really passionate about, because he believes that it's being routinely overlooked by companies. So some companies have always been doing it, and others are only just now realizing that that's really important. And it's really crucial to improve customer experience. And at Thematic, so I'm the CEO and co-founder of Thematic, and we analyze customer feedback to help companies improve customer experience. And I'm all up for hearing what Michael has to share today, because this is what our customers care about. And I'm really excited to host this webinar. So enough about me. I would love to hear from you, Michael. What is your background, and how did you get into the world of customer experience, and why are you so passionate about this topic?
Thank you, Alyona. Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock or thereabouts in southern New Jersey. We are just above the storm coming into the North Carolina, South Carolina area. We're grateful so we don't get hit with another Sandy like we did a few years ago. Bit about my background. I mean, I've been involved in customer experience and employee experience consultation, training, research for actually several decades. Academically, my dissertation was actually in kind of the topic that we're getting in today, employee ambassadorship. I've written several books as well on customer experience and corporate culture, stakeholder-based culture, and my background is corporate. It's vendor for an array of industries literally around the world, and really, the focus that I've had is understanding what it is that drives behavior, and where that all comes from, where it leads, how it gets measured. As I said, my dissertation was actually in employee ambassadorship. You see in my full title a couple of sets of letters behind my name. I've got an accreditation in management consulting, and also from the CXPA, a CCXP, which is customer experience professional. So this has kind of led us into understanding not only what it is that creates employee behavior, customer behavior, and sustains it, but also what contributes to it. We can go to the next slide if you like, Alyona, because we want to talk about employee ambassadorship and what it means. And just kind of as a basis, what I will tell you is that employee ambassadorship is kind of a build and kind of the next logical step, we think, beyond employee sat, beyond employee engagement. Employee engagement kind of focuses on fit, alignment, and productivity, and is largely managed through human relations, HR. And that's all fine, but we've seen companies that are more customer focused, like Southwest Airlines, like TD Bank, like Umpqua Bank, like Metro Bank, Wegmans, a number of companies, Trader Joe's, that have focused a lot more on leveraging employee behavior to deliver superior customer experience. And so when we're talking about employee ambassadorship, there we're talking about commitment. And it's really 3 or 4 levels of commitment. It's commitment to the organization itself, which is really what you want with regard to engagement and satisfaction. But it's commitment as well to the product or service value proposition of the organization, commitment to the customers, and I would add commitment to fellow employees. When you put all these together, and we'll be showing you a quick Venn diagram, now you've got what we define as ambassadorship. And there are a number of things that go into what makes a real employee ambassador. But you go to the next slides if you like.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So what we find is not only is there this linkage between the two major stakeholder groups, customers who are looking at their personal commitment, what creates value for them to a supplier. We're looking both at the things that are rational and emotional as far as their experiences, their transactions, their relations. The employees likewise impact customer loyalty, and we've got lots of data, tons of data that show the direct and indirect ways that employees can affect customer behavior. One of the ways that customer feedback, for example, impacts employee behavior is if it's used for communication, for training, for reward and recognition, etc. So even the feedback that you get from customers can be used to create this stronger linkage with employees. Again, something we see done relatively rarely by organizations, but when it's done, and our organization happens to do a fair amount of this, again, when you're talking about training, communication, reward and recognition, motivation, the information that you're getting from customers, again, can be used to strengthen this linkage. You go to the next slide.
Yeah, I love this, and especially because I often hear from companies that improve your employee experience and your customer experience will be better. But what I love about seeing it this way, that it actually goes both ways, and it's about making your employees more customer-centric and bringing it back in the loop, right?
It's true, and my experience with this goes back actually to the 90s. There was a book by a guy who used to head Rosenbluth International, which was acquired by American Express Travel Management. His name is Hal Rosenbluth, and he co-wrote a book called The Customer Comes Second. And this was one of the first books that looked at specifically how employee behavior impacts customer behavior. I'll give you a quick quote because I pulled it. Companies are only fooling themselves when they believe that the customer comes first. People do not inherently put the customer first, and they certainly don't do it because their employer expects it. We're not saying choose your people over your customers. We're saying focus on your people because of your customers. That way, everybody wins. So if you're talking about enablement, empowerment, again, reward and recognition, career pathing, all these things that are important to employees, we find, if they're built around what it is that drives employee experience such that they are creating greater value for customers, that's where Rosenbluth comes in and everybody wins. I'll quote a couple of other books that I think are pretty seminal. One was co-written by Jag Sheth and Raj Sisodia called Firms of Endearment. And another one co-written by Raj Sisodia and also John Mackey, who is the co-CEO of Whole Foods, was called Conscious Capitalism. And the concepts in those two books were pretty much the same. It really says, okay, is everybody pulling the same way on behalf of both employee experience and customer experience? When you do that, you've got a winner. Whole Foods is another great example of where that kind of thing occurs. You go to the next slide, and there's a build on this, and you can hit it again if you want. But what we see, as I said, is people can be extremely important. They're critically important. If it's not well done, you've got high percentages of customers who say, okay, emotionally, I don't see it. The relationship isn't good. I'm leaving. On the other hand, you've got almost half in this other study, customers are loyal because of positive employee attitude, and brand perception is heavily influenced by experiences with people. And here was a UK retailer that we looked at, and again, our focus is on what it is that drives commitment. And in this particular case, over time, they looked at a registered and well-documented increase in the way that they understood commitment resulted in a 9% increase in monthly sales. So, if the issue is what creates, financial value, there it is. And when it's kind of reciprocated so that you're now building the employee experience to be more focused on customers and customer value, then you've really created something. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, and this is the Venn diagram that I mentioned. If the individual, if the employees are focused on the organization, the product and service value proposition, and I would say, the third element is the customer, but also on fellow employees. Obviously, we believe in customer-first teams and teamwork in general, and when you've got that, you've got something that is really excellent and functioning well for the long term. You go to the next slide. This is a case study. I wanted to review some of this because this was one of the first times that we used an approach that we developed at Beyond Philosophy to really understand what it was, in this particular case, that was driving employee value. And here this was a customer service group at a financial services company. We got a very high response rate. This was done originally in October 2015. And we were looking, if you start looking at the breakdown of employees, function, level, gender, tenure. I'm kind of the school of total quality guru, W. Edwards Deming. Deming believed that everybody in the organization, not just senior leadership, not just frontline, everybody has either direct or indirect influence on customer behavior. And so that way, whether you're talking about baking employee ambassadorship into the culture, also baking it into job descriptions, he believed that that's the way that you really get it set and strategic. So what we were trying to find out in this case study, and this is an organization that was, from an employee engagement standpoint, doing pretty well, and we had HR actively involved in this research. You go to the next slide, and we'll talk some about what we learned. These are some of the things we did through a workshop with the client where we had HR, we had customer support, we had marketing, and we had sales. Quite a number of people. What we were endeavoring to do is identify about 40 different attributes that we could then run through our structured equation model. And one of the things that you can see here is that things like value to customers comes up, fairly frequently. In fact, you go to the next slide because, here you see the different categories, and one of them, we had a whole section on customer focus, but also communication with customers, customer focus within my department, leadership committed to the same level of customer value as I am. Out of the 40, in this particular case, it was early on, we had 13 out of the 40 attributes that we were looking at that were really focused on customer value. In later research, we have gone to 50, 60% of the diagnostics that we look at that are really focused through employees on customer value. But this was a starting point. This was kind of almost a beta 3 or 4 years ago. We've done quite a number of these since.
So just to clarify, are these are the 40 attributes, and you basically got employees to rate the company on each one?
Yes, exactly. It's the level of agreement. So if you look at a statement at the top under tools, I know how to use the tools made available to communicate with customers, strongly agree to strongly disagree. So it becomes a Likert scale. It's an agree-disagree scale, and then we can use that and combine it. You'll see in just a moment, we also have a number of components that make up what we call our employee ambassadorship framework, and we're able to, again, without getting too technical, we can use structured equation modeling to find out what is really driving value for the organization through employees. So let's look at the next slide. Here are the value indicators that we use. Now, the bottom four, there's an internal appraisal score, employee knowledge, an ease score that they use, and also an employee tenure score. So we can see people who've been at this organization under 1 year, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 and more. But the first three at the top, employee sat, employee engagement, employee commitment, there are a total of 8 questions there. The top 2 have to do with satisfaction within the job, and are you going to stay? Employee engagement is the kind of thing that you will see typically when you're doing engagement studies. Your personal commitment to the success of the organization, your belief in the goals and the objectives, and loyalty to the company. And then employee commitment really kind of gets into, to a degree, Alyona, into the things that Thematic does, because we want to understand the frequency with which you say good things about the organization to either the people inside the company or outside the company. Doesn't matter. And this is, we're talking about the products and services, and, you know, do the products and services exceed customer expectations? When we combine these 8 questions, we're able to identify this level of ambassadorship, the commitment to the organization, product and service value, and customers. Go to the next slide. So here we can do a straight rating, and we can look at, you know, the level of agreement. I'm dedicated to providing value to customers, obviously very, very high. It's what we would call the promoter zone. Then we have a bunch of them in the middle that just on a straight rating are what we would call the passive zone, but some of them are pretty low, right? Just on a straight rating. And this is just kind of the beginning of what we do, because, you know, we want our clients to see, okay, well, if you were just looking without doing any kind of multivariate analysis, this is where you'd end up. And you probably wouldn't know very much. So go to the next slide. We also look at, you know, this is work that we have done around the world. We will apply what we call an emotional hierarchy. So we can look at the level of negativity. We can look at neutrality, which we identify as attention. We can get more positive but not vocal when we're looking at what we call a recommendation cluster, and then an advocacy cluster. We literally then have created around these, which you'll see on the next slide, personas around these. We have done probably now about 75,000 individual interviews to verify this model. And so whether we're talking about customers or employees, we know that this is a very stable model. It works very well. Next slide.
I just want to make sure that I understand this. So with this financial company, so you did the survey, and then here you basically ranked people's responses.
Yes.
And what was the outcome? You basically found that's coming.
I'll take you through it, because we first then have to then create kind of these they're basically personas. So I can look at a destroyer or a saboteur, those things, those characteristics emotionally, which you will see, I think, on the next slide, that are creating negativity, ambivalence, loyalty, and ambassador. Now, ambassador is not only very positive, but they're also very vocal, which is what you want. And so, you know, we're able, whether we're looking at customers or employees, we're able to create kind of these personas so that we can help our clients kind of get more toward the upper level, create this ambassadorship kind of behavior, certainly the loyalist kind of behavior. Ambivalence and negativity are the kinds of things that we want to understand, identify the causes of them, and then turn them around. You go to the next slide, and, you know, continue to ask me questions. It's fine. This is good. Okay. So what we did also is we created this emotional profile. And so, you know, we're not only looking at the way that things are rated. These things are rated in terms of your experience as an employee, but also looking at advocacy, recommendation, attention, and destroying it. We found overall for this particular client that there was a high level of negativity, frustration, right, stress, and feeling hurried. This was overall. Now you go to the next slide and you'll see kind of, the real critical learning that we got here.
So what are the red, what's the red and
the
green?
The red says, the higher this is compared to the base that we have, which is really the kind of the violet or the purple, and on the greens on the other side, you want more positive. And we got it. We did get it. We got positive, but you're trying to, within the company, minimize the amount of negativity. And what you find here is that there was a high level of frustration, a high level of stress, and a high level of feeling hurried, which we found when we did our structured equation modeling actually undermined all these positive greens that you're seeing on the left. And there's a reason for it, which I'll show you in just a second. You go to the next slide. So we're not going to go through the entirety, obviously, of what we presented to the client in this session today, because we really don't have time. But what we are going to do is talk about what was really causing a lot of the negativity that we saw. And what we saw was that the longer you had been with this company, this is an organization, and HR honestly didn't realize it. They were putting a lot of emphasis on people who were just coming into the organization, have been with the organization less than a year. When you start looking at the scores that we got for 1 to 5 years, and then 10 years plus, the level of negativity kind of across the board was enormous. You can, and what you see in these symbols at the bottom that look kind of like a zero, that shows you that there was significance in almost every one of these. That the shorter the period of time that you are with the organization, the more positive you were. Now, this had to do with onboarding, training, career pathing, communication, reward and recognition. Once you had been there 1 to 5 years, you were kind of forgotten about. Once you had been there 10 years, in fact, when we reviewed the information with HR, they had no idea what percentage of their employees who completed this work had been there over 10 years. It ended up being over 1/4. And yet these are the people who ought to be the backbone of the organization. They were the ones with the strongest number of issues. And then we got into what was really creating negativity across the board, and I think we've got that on the next slide. Now this is what happens, and we've got a slide that shows what we mean by subconscious, those things that are really driving the unstated value. And you have conscious value where it's known, it's almost kind of like direct importance. Deception are the kinds of things that organizations often work on through things like engagement and satisfaction, because they feel like they're going to drive behavior, going to drive value. We call them deception because even though they seem to be desired by the employees, they don't really create value. And then you've got a bunch of these things on the bottom here. If you look kind of where the blue ends there, kind of in the middle, and you look at the gray on the left, there are about 10 attributes here that we identified that were really undermining the value that the employees were creating for the organization. That was probably the most critical thing that we learned. All of these things, and I can recall it because I did the presentation, HR had never seen before. And we were able to root cause this because a lot of this was coming from employees, pardon me, who had been with the organization for 1 to 5 years, or 5 to 10, 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10, and 10 and above. We even, when we came into the organization, I have it, and I think you've seen it in the full deck that I sent you. We took a picture of a big sign that was in the hallway when we came to present our results, and that sign said, "Welcome, new hires." Now, when we started talking to human resources and also management of this customer support group, what we found was there wasn't any recognition for employees who had been there for 10 and more years. There wasn't, new training. There wasn't, much in the way of reward and recognition beyond a certain point. They were focused a lot more on their newer employees. Frankly, that was undermining the culture. And what you can see here in those bottom 10 or so diagnostics is that it was pretty severe stuff, and it was pretty worrisome. So our counsel was, to start setting up training around these things, first of all, to communicate back to employees about what was going on, and then what initiatives the organization was going to take in order to improve these kinds of things. Our job isn't, coming in as researchers and consultants and trainers, isn't to find negatives. Our job is to find out what it is that's creating or undermining value. And that's exactly what we did here. And the approach that we took with the employees is almost identical to the approach that we take with customers. Again, because there's so much commonality in terms of what's desired in the experience. It's personalized value. So that's what we're endeavoring to create for our clients everywhere.
And so you work with many different companies, and how typical are these findings for, let's say, financial organizations in general, or what are some of the trends you're seeing across industries or types of companies? Do they have similar issues?
It's a great question. I think what's happening now is that HR is beginning to become through books like Firms of Endearment and Conscious Capitalism and The Customer Comes Second, and similar books, and a fair number of presentations and studies where we've shown some of the results. If nothing else, the financial value for the organization is there if they can focus more on delivering customer value through an upgraded and more focused employee experience. And again, something that's baked into the job description, something that's baked in to the organizational culture. So what we see are the trends of HR is starting to become a more proactive, positive partner, a co-equal partner at the leadership table when these things are being discussed. And you can experience it when you look at paradigm organizations, like Zappos and Amazon and Southwest Airlines and Wegmans and TD Bank and other organizations, Virgin, where these things are understood. They're part of the mantra of the organization. In the deck that I sent you, I used the example of MBNA Bank, which was at one point the second largest credit card issuer in the United States. They were bought out, acquired by Bank of America, I think, in 2006. Their mantra, and I used to take clients to their corporate headquarters in Wilmington, Delaware. It was written on every wall. It was written in your desk. It was on your paycheck. Think of yourself as the customer. So, wherever you were in that organization, you were not really permitted to be too far away from what was going on with the customers. Key metrics were posted on the screens throughout the organization so that every day, whoever you were, even if you were a janitor or the CEO of the organization, you could see how the organization was performing. And they were tremendously successful because of this. Very low loan default rates, very high profitability, very high cardholder retention, all of the things if you're a credit card issuer that you want. But you can look at other organizations, the Container Store. You can look at IKEA. You can look at organizations where this integration of employee and customer is really a focus, and see how well these organizations consistently are doing. And again, that's a lot of the reasons. They have prioritized value through the employees, through the employee experience, in creating benefit for the customer. So I think your question was a really good one, and it ends up being fairly holistic. Mm-hmm. So we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I love this slide because it tells you, talks through some of the things you've seen people have done to build this ambassadorship among the employees.
Absolutely. My colleague, Jill Griffin, Jill and I co-wrote a book in 2001. Jill's written several books. I've written several books. She's a terrific organizational consultant. We were focused on customer win-back, sort of the back end of the customer life cycle. Once the customer has been acquired, how do you maintain value? If value is undermined, if it's eroded, and even if the customer leaves, how do you keep that from happening? How do you hold on to the customer? How can you recover a customer that's lost? One of the critical focuses that we had was, what's the employee's role? So this is 2001. We saw it 17, 18 years ago, as we see it today, as being extremely important, if not absolutely critical. The climate and culture of employee trust and authenticity. Employees have got to be kind of equal partners here. If you're looking at an organization as being customer-centric, I'd almost counsel an organization to go to the next level and be stakeholder-centric, so that you're focused on vendors, you're focused on employees, you're focused on customers, you're even focused to a degree on the general public. You want to create this culture of trust and authenticity. If you want to understand what it is that motivates behavior, kind of starting to move into positive territory, it starts with trust. It starts with authenticity. There are a lot of instances that we've seen with organizations like United Airlines, with organizations like we start there. United Airlines, where they've had problems. Wells Fargo, there's another one that I can mention. Target, as an organization, because of data issues, has had problems with trust, certainly in Canada, also in the United States. So that's a critical start. Next, training. Training is absolutely critical. When you're going to drive an initiative to create stronger value for all stakeholders, you want to be able to train all employees, again, not just frontline, not just at senior leadership levels, in customer sensitivity and the value proposition. And as I said at the outset, it's almost essential that you embed the customer experience and what's required in every single job description. Career pathing, mentoring, all of these kinds of things are absolutely essential as well. If I can get a greater responsibility, greater empowerment, greater enablement in order to drive value for customers, then I can say that a lot is being done. Frequent and personalized evaluations and contribution reviews. Employees dread the once a quarter, the once a year review, and for good reason. What kind of bad news am I going to get? There's a lot of feeling about the 1 minute manager and the 1 minute review, and Ken Blanchard's ideas going back decades. You want to be able to get these things quickly and to make course corrections, where they will do the most good, and so that they're absolutely focused and absolutely targeted on creating stronger value. This whole business of seeking to inform and seeking to debrief and also be transparent, we've seen organizations be very successful when whatever they learn from customers. Now, you're involved in text analytics. If you're getting negative messaging back from customers about some aspect or aspects of the customer experience, it's very important, we found, that employees understand this. A lot of times what we will do is something called mirroring. We will ask employees, and I've got in the deck that you have, whole studies that we have done to look at the way employees think customers will rate them in certain aspects of experience relative to what the customers are actually saying. And very often, there's significant disconnect. We're trying to mitigate that, certainly to narrow it so that customers, even if things are not going well, that employees have a good understanding of it because they are getting shared feedback that the customers are providing. So, management may be telling them, for example, that they're, if you're, let's say you're in customer service, management may be telling you that you're doing a terrible job in certain areas of customer support. On the other hand, customers may be telling you you're doing just fine. So this is where this disconnect that we've identified, early on in the deck today is that, there's deception there. So if the organization is focused on things that aren't really driving strong customer behavior, positive customer behavior, they instead can be focused on other things that are really going to create and sustain it. So, again, this seeking to inform, seeking to debrief, this we have found with leading edge organizations is actually part of training. Recognize and reward customer-focused initiative. Great. When things are being done well in organizations, even if it isn't part of the current organizational model, recognize it, pick it up, focus on it, reward it. It's absolutely essential that because we're endeavoring to create stronger, more positive, more sustained, more personalized customer experiences, this is extremely valuable. A lot of studies that we've seen ask employees to tell us what is it they want, what is it they need, and then it kind of gets round filed somewhere. Nothing is ever done. Or, the organization decides that no, the employees want X, Y, and Z. We can't provide X, Y, and Z. We have other priorities. So what is the poor employee left to do? You asked for my perception. You asked me to identify what it is that will make a better experience for me, and you don't care. So, don't just ask employees what they want, need to succeed. Provide it. Certainly provide feedback to the employees on what the plans are, and if there are other priorities that need to be taken care of first, or maybe instead of, the employees need to understand that. By all means, have fun. One of the, years ago, I worked with a fellow who was the head of customer support for Ben & Jerry's, of all things. Ben & Jerry's is a great place to be an employee. They do things. They have a grand poobah of joy, and I think he's still there. I mean, it kind of rotates responsibilities. But this is a person whose responsibility is to come up with things that are fun for the employees, to break things up, to make working there palatable, and something that they can enjoy day after day. And then finally, hire the right employees in the first place. Now, there's a bit more to be said about this. I'm not critical of HR, but what I've seen with more focus on who you bring in, there's still a lot of who you eliminate, and there's been a lot more, I think, emphasis over the past few years on making sure that you have an absolutely square peg in a square hole, or a round peg in a round hole. And under the rubric, and I kind of almost put quotes around it, of talent acquisition, we've seen lots of instances of people who are very, very qualified, who, for any number of reasons, they don't have quite the industry depth. They may bring kind of novel, useful, operationally viable ideas, but they're never considered because the stricture that HR has been given and talent acquisition has been given is to stay within the dots, stay within the lines, and that means that you don't get. It's almost like how much fertilizer you're going to use for your plants. I mean, if you don't let in a certain amount of nourishment and nutrition, to the organization, you can end up with entropy. And the law of entropy says if you leave something alone long enough, or keep doing things the same way long enough, they will ultimately tend to fall apart of their own volition. And so we're looking to HR and sort of the more advanced HR folks that we talk to in talent acquisition have a broader view of who the right employees are. And that's why I put quotes around right. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of learning here, I think, that these are kind of the 9 things that Jill and I identified. And over the years, honestly, they've stayed pretty much the same. I mean, we've built these out a little bit more to give a little more depth to what they are, but these are kind of the 9, in general, and I can look at them as directives that we would offer organizations as far as how you build ambassadorship. And by the way, part of the right employees, who's going to be vocal? Who's going to be quiet? Who's going to be helpful? Who's going to be proactive? There's an old story, by the way, about, I'll throw in very quickly. Southwest Airlines was looking to hire at a senior management level a captain from another airline who had been with that airline for many years and was known to be very professional and very capable. And they brought this captain in and had him co-pilot a Southwest Airlines flight. And if you've ever been on Southwest Airlines, or anybody on the call today has ever been on Southwest Airlines, it's a different kind of experience than you have at most other airlines. It's light. It's fun. They want to keep you safe. They want to get you from point to point with a minimum of fuss and bother, but they also want to create a different kind of experience. This captain wasn't hired. Why wasn't he hired? Because if you're used to being on Southwest Airlines, there's interaction between the cockpit crew, a lot of it, and the passengers. This captain didn't talk to anybody. He just sat and he did his job and he got off and he left. They didn't hire him. Southwest Airlines will normally have, when they're hiring people, they will have passengers, they will have employees of all different stripes conducting the interviews. They will do group interviews. They typically hire about 1.5% to 2% of everybody who applies. So they want people who are going to fit with the kind of experience-based, stakeholder-centric culture that they've created and that they sustain. Again, also, who's the right employee. So those are the 9 things, I think, and I think that they hold up pretty well.
Mm. And it sounds like, one of the core things that underlines the things like hiring the right employees is to know what is it, the special thing about your organization. Just like you mentioned in the Southwest Airline, like what is it, what makes us as a company stand out in our customers' eyes, and then how do you fit in with that, and do you subscribe to that as well?
Yeah, and just using the words kind of isn't enough. Let's say an organization wants to hire like a manager or a director of customer experience, and what they really want to do, and the words are there in the job description. But what they really want to do is just have somebody who's going to be, help build out their client relations agenda. That's not organization-wide. It doesn't include everybody. It's, again, when an organization is looking to create stronger customer experience, whatever initiative is taken, it ultimately has to, it's like, the ripples in a pool. It's got to extend out to the entire organization. Again, like Deming believed, everybody in the organization had one of two roles. You either support the customer or you support somebody who does. So if that's not written in the job description of every function and of every person that's brought into the organization, then the effort is kind of incomplete. And you won't, the right employees to match the culture, again, given that it is a proactive, customer-focused culture, you won't get there. But you can get there if you do these other kinds of things that we've talked about, and then have a more expansive way of looking at talent acquisition. So it's all possible. It's all possible.
Great. This is all very interesting, but we're almost out of time. So if people want to learn more and want to get in touch with you, what's the best way of reaching you?
Yeah, well, you've got here on, you've got my direct line. You also have my email address. These are the books that I've written. The one on the right that's kind of buried behind our pictures is Employee Ambassadorship. And Employee Ambassadorship covered all of the things that we discussed today and a great deal more. It was written in 2017, holds up very well. But, like I said, even books like Customer Winback and The Customer Advocate and The Customer Saboteur and Customers Inside, Customers Outside have very critical components of the employee and the employee's role, and frankly, what employee ambassadorship means. So, you can look at it as kind of employee commitment on steroids. And again, these leading companies are able to execute it. And that's kind of, if organizations are interested in moving from employee sat and what that means, because it's fairly attitudinal and reactive, to employee engagement, which is fine. It's been around since the 90s, and it's about employee fit and alignment, productivity. These are kind of pillars, in which lead us to employee ambassadorship. What employee ambassadorship does is take us to the next level, to create stronger stakeholder centricity and more focus on experience and value. So if you're interested in learning more, happy to have you get in touch with me, and glad to begin a dialogue.
Sounds great. And thank you, those who have joined us today, and those who have watched the recording. We will be sending it to everybody. And most of all, thanks so much, Michael, for sharing your knowledge today. And you're clearly passionate about this topic, and it was amazing to learn from all of the years you've put into this.
Well, thank you, Alyona. It's delightful to be here, and appreciate your interest as well. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.